Think you're diversified just because you have a Fidelity and Schwab account? Think again.
Welcome to The Relax. It's Retirement Podcast with your host, Josh Leonard, where we talk about transitioning into retirement with intent. I'm Wendy McConnell. Well, hey there, Josh. How are you?
Good. Just off of a busy holiday season, tons of celebrations, anniversaries, birthdays, the normal holidays, New Year, all that. So, ready for that January exercise,
All right.
burn off those extra calories.
It's been so long now, we forgot that Pete Belcastro is here as well because, we got used to doing the show without him.
I know.
All right. That's good to be back, Wendy. Thanks for, always good to get the invite here, and kicking off 2025 is exciting.
It is exciting. So what excitement do you have in store for us today, Josh?
Well, much like my diet here over the last few months, it's been very diversified and not necessarily only in a healthy manner. So
yes, I know all about it.
The gut has gotten bigger, but we know
the butt too.
The gut, but maybe. That's not on view of the podcast here, Wendy. This is for all ages
butt.
here. Okay?
I don't know.
But as January is the healthy time of the year, right, Wendy? This is when we're all healthy at least for a week, and then we forget about it.
Yes.
We thought we'd talk about diversification. So just like a proper diet, you eat some veggies, you eat some fruits, you eat some meat, but not all meat and sweets or those food groups that we tend to eat too much of around the holidays. So today we're going to talk about diversification. And diversification can mean many things to many people. I think the common one that we get when people come in is like, oh, I have a Schwab and a Fidelity account and then my 401k from work, so I'm diversified, right? And Pete, I'm sure you're like, yeah, no.
Yeah, somebody comes across, across our desk and you start digging in and like, yeah, I got all these different things. And, you realize that they are with different companies and maybe, those old 401ks, they had advice from different places. And then you start digging into them and the actual investments turn out to be a lot more similar than people tend to realize.
So let me see if I've got this straight. People think they're diversified because they're with different companies, but I may be wrong here, I was under the impression that diversified meant what you were investing in.
Ding, ding, ding.
See,
Correct.
You're doing your job well, Josh.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly, Wendy. Yeah, I think, that's it. An S&P 500 fund made by Vanguard and one made by BlackRock are pretty much the same thing, right? They're both, the goal is to track the S&P 500. So they might deviate a little bit in who the manager is or the fee structure. There might be slightly different weightings. Historically, they might have deviated a little bit more from the S&P 500. I could go on all day, but for the most part, they're the same thing. So if you own two of the same type of funds, you're not really diversified outside of the S&P 500 there.
Yeah, and I think just taking a step back and saying why do we preach diversification? Why is that something that's important? And, whenever you are concentrated in anything, if you have all your eggs in one basket, what happens if you drop that basket? So that's really what we're talking about is we want to mitigate those things. And if you feel like you're doing that by having different, custodians is what we call them, or Fidelity or Schwab or even your bank. If you don't dig into those things, you still just have one basket, even though you have all these different things.
Yeah, and I think many times on that same kind of thread, we'll come across prospective clients that say, I have multiple advisors, and that, in theory, is helpful to the client because they feel like, hey, I got two people watching my stuff. Well, really, you got two halves of a person watching your stuff because the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing unless there's proper communication set up. And maybe in certain people's portfolios, there is a reason to specialize. Maybe they want an advisor that deals with a very unique asset class. Maybe there's a reason to have multiple advisors. But for most people, it's good to just have that whole picture in one place. Having an account at Fidelity with all the same holdings as an account in Schwab is not really giving you any additional protection. The idea of diversification is you're spreading risk out. You're not really taking risk any differently if you own all the same things in two different places. You just have them in two different places.
So what do we need to focus on then when we're talking about diversification? Like when you're talking about the types of investments, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so type of investments can be one way. You can have different investment tools. More importantly, we like to kind of do an X-ray of what's actually in the portfolio, because you can own individual stocks and individual bonds. You can own mutual funds and ETFs. If an ETF is owning the same thing as the stocks that you own outside of the ETF, again, that's not really diversifying any further. So we want to look for overlap. If we have a high concentration, let's say, in Microsoft stock, we probably don't want to own a bunch of funds that also have a very high concentration in Microsoft stock, because that's not providing any further diversification for us. Owning a mutual fund that owns pretty much all the same stuff as an ETF, again, isn't giving us any further diversification there. When we think of diversification, we want to think of different sectors, different regions of the markets, also between companies. Maybe you're very optimistic that a certain industry is going to do well. AI has been really big. It's been, a hot topic lately. So, okay, if you're interested in that space, what companies stand to benefit most from the implementation of that technology? And that doesn't mean only owning NVIDIA, which has been in the headlines, but maybe some of the companies downstream from there, or what other companies have done research to implement AI into their workflows ahead of time, more so than their competitors in a respective sector. So, being diversified doesn't mean that you're not, looking to fulfill a thesis, but rather you're spreading out the risk in that thesis.
Yeah.
So what does diversification by region mean then? Because I heard you mention that, but I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Yeah, so that can be by country. So most people in the U.S. have a bias towards the U.S., so they want to own domestic U.S.-based companies. So diversification can mean owning some companies in Asia or in Europe or in South America as well. Now, the U.S. is the largest publicly traded market, so we will most likely have most of our assets in the U.S., but getting some diversification outside of that region can be helpful. So by region, we're talking about geographic region.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to looking overseas as far as, a lot of places that are up and coming have a lot greater potential than companies here in the U.S. There's some commodities that you can only find in other areas. So, we know that we're looking at a lot of precious metals. So, we know that if you aren't invested in, like South America or even Asia, you might miss those opportunities. So, even though we need a lot of special, precious metals right now, it might not always be the case, but it's good to have that. So whenever we know that these companies are looking for the different products, hey, you're in those areas already. You don't have to worry about going outside.
Yeah, so when looking at a portfolio, that's it. We want to look at where you're geographically located. Also, we want to look at the different sectors that you're in. So do you own all technology stocks? Do you own all healthcare stocks? Do you own all oil stocks? We've seen that sometimes different sectors of the market are hot for a while, so people put more money in, right? If I'm making a lot of money there, I want to put all my money there until it doesn't work. Yeah. And then you're really upset. So diversification is moving away from that ultra high concentration.
Should I only go with companies that are like really, really big companies?
That would be size diversification as well. So that's another common thing that people will do is, hey, I only want to own the largest companies of all. Well, there's some small cap companies or smaller publicly traded companies that have been in business for a really long time that do really well and continue to deliver profits for their shareholders. So that's also a good investment. we want to make sure that we're looking throughout the market for those opportunities and not just being focused in large companies with a growth orientation or with a income allocation. Some people like investing in dividend paying stocks because they pay you an income, right? So that certainly can be a piece or a substantial piece of your retirement portfolio. But if our filter says we're only using dividend paying stocks, we might miss out on some of the largest growth areas in the market. So we want to keep an eye on that as a whole picture.
Yeah, typically when you start looking at smaller companies, they are a little bit more risky than the larger companies. And, you're taking a little bit more risk and you expect a little bit more, return from those things. And, the reason why we do look at all these things is once you do take every sector into account, different regions, different market cap, we have this kind of squiggly line that we talk about kind of going up, and to the right, over a long time frame. By investing in all these different things, it flattens out that line, and that's really what's very important for for people that are transitioning to retirement. Because not only is it tough to stomach ups and downs in your portfolios, but you need to maintain income during even the down times in the market. So that's really flatten out that line is why we have to look at all these sectors. Because you might be sitting there 1 year and small cap companies are doing 30-40%, and you look back and you're like, why is my return suffering over the long term? It's because you missed out on some of these times.
All right. So tell me about taxes.
Yeah. Hi, Wendy. Those are words close to my heart.
I can't wait to hear about taxes.
So we need to think of diversification in terms of tax diversification as well. Traditionally in retirement, we put everything into a retirement account. If you're fortunate enough to have an employer that provides you with a 401k match, you might be maxing that out every year. And for many folks, that is the bulk of their retirement savings. Now, most 401ks offer a Roth 401k option. If you contribute some money to the Roth and some to the traditional 401k, you have some diversification of how that money is taxed. If everything goes into the traditional 401k, once you retire, all of that money coming out is taxed. If you have some in the Roth, you'd have an option for some tax-free money. So if you retire and you need to buy a new car, or maybe it's a fun purchase like an RV because you're going to drive across the U.S., it would be really nice to have that down payment money come out without bumping you up a tax bracket.
Yeah, we often see that, contributing to a Roth IRA, whenever you do put money away and you don't have to pay taxes on it first, it's a great benefit. 100% of your money goes to work right away, and it's really hard over a long time frame to really beat that. But where we do see opportunities is, when we first start working, hey, you're in a low tax bracket, you're not making too much. Check out those Roth options. You might not benefit that much from getting that tax write-off. It's maybe too minimal. So take advantage of that. And then we see actually towards the end of people's careers. So once we start getting close to retirement, if a client does not have this option, it's really important to get that established as well. There's some rules as far as having a Roth open for 5 years before taking money out, that you want to have that set up. So keeping in mind that if you have this set up at the beginning and then you start looking at it towards the end, you can really have a chance to kind of like Josh said, maximize where you get those funds from. So it's kind of a timing thing too. It doesn't always make sense to contribute the entire time through your career, because you might benefit greatly by decreasing your income and your tax bracket. But whenever you start, whenever you go to look at withdrawing funds, having a place to withdraw it tax-free is really important and can be a great benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also in retirement, we can see taxable investment accounts to be a great tool for clients to have as well. Depending on where you're falling, you might not actually be paying taxes on those capital gains in those after-tax accounts. So while you might have bought ABC stock for $10 and now it's worth $100, and you think, oh, I have $90 worth of capital gains tax in there. If your income's low enough, you might not actually be paying taxes on that gain because it falls into a 0% tax bracket. Now, having that diversification and that as an option in retirement allows you more financial flexibility where that diversification comes into play. Oh, and by the way, if you don't use that too, Wendy, guess what? Your kids or whoever inherits that account would get a step up in basis as well. So it helps you during retirement and then also for your legacy as well.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of important to have all three of these categories covered. You got something that's all your money's tax deferred. When you're retirement, it's taxed as ordinary income. It's nice to have something you already pay taxes on, and that when you withdraw in retirement, no taxes are owed. And it's also important to have an account that you've been paying taxes on the entire time that really isn't going to affect your tax bracket too much and maybe is a better asset to inherit. So start thinking about the next generation.
What else can we diversify?
Oh, we can diversify all kinds of stuff here.
Okay.
Let's we can
hear it.
diversify our financial tools as well. So our conversation so far has been around stocks and bonds, essentially, right? And then taxes, right? So ETFs, mutual funds, are mostly a combination of stocks and bonds within those accounts. But that's all the market-based stuff. We can also diversify our financial tools. Maybe we're worried about running out of income in retirement. So we could look to provide a guaranteed income through something like an annuity. Or just to provide some certainty there with returns, we could use a fixed rate annuity for a specified amount of time. If we're worried about our legacy, about getting a specific amount of money to the next generation, we can look at financial tools like life insurance. That's a great way, especially if there is real estate or other illiquid assets in the portfolio, to have a nice cash flow come into your beneficiaries to make that transition to the next generation a little bit easier. If we think of the family farm, so to speak, that is sort of something typically that people want to keep in the family, but there's a lot of tax costs, there's a lot of upkeep costs. So having some cash flow come in to help sustain that illiquid asset makes it a lot easier for the next generation. So if that's something you're looking at, diversifying out in financial tools could help you a lot. We can also think about things like long-term care. So having diversification in financial tools, meaning maybe even long-term care insurance or life insurance that provides a long-term care benefit, can help meet your total needs and isolate a piece of your portfolio from that market risk as a whole, right? We're designating it to mitigate a separate risk outside of our market risk.
Yeah, and I think that whenever you do look at your underlying investments and you have something that is providing a guaranteed income, it allows you to stomach some of these downturns in the market, you know. So yeah, like Josh said, we were just really talking about maybe, you know, individual stocks, mutual funds, or individual, you know, bonds before. But, you know, when you start looking at, you know, when does this thing pay off? It's a long term, and, you know, staying to that plan, a lot of these alternative investments help you stick to your plan.
Yeah. I think, you know, as you brought up alternative investments, my mind typically will go to things with alternative investments like REITs, commodities, things like that can also help you diversify further as well. Certainly, I'm not telling you to take your whole IRA and put it in gold, but for some folks, that's something that they find comfort in, holding physical gold or silver or other precious metals. That would be another diversification outside of your traditional portfolio. You could also look at real estate. For some folks, they're comfortable being a landlord as a part-time job, so maybe they're investing some of their money into a rental property where they feel that they're getting good cash flow out of that investment, and while hopefully it's appreciating in price as well over time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what are some of the things we need to keep in mind as we're diversifying this and diversifying that?
How can you tell if you're diversified or not? You know?
Yeah. Have you had a diversification check today, Wendy. We'll check everything out.
I haven't. No. Could you do that for me?
Sure, sure. Well, one of the things that we do when we work with clients initially is we take a look through everything they own and we do an x-ray. We kind of look at what they hold. What do all these funds actually mean behind the curtains? What are the fees you're paying? Where are you allocated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Many times that's eye-opening to clients because they see they actually own Microsoft or Google or Amazon in 8 different accounts in 8 different ways, right? And when they own it in this account with their left hand, they're paying 35 basis points for it. And over here, they're paying 50 basis points for it. So sometimes it makes sense to kind of coordinate that and see what that overlap might be. In terms of diversification, mostly we see the most obvious things are individual stocks. So someone has accumulated a lot of money in an individual stock over time, either because maybe they worked for the company and they were buying it at a discount, or they were granted stock as part of their compensation, or they just really like the company and they were paying a little bit in out of their paycheck over a long period of time, and now it's an outsized piece of their portfolio. When I say outsized, to me, that's anything more than 10% of your portfolio. That becomes a really large risk. If we think of companies like Enron or even GE that either had rampant fraud or just a really big pullback in the stock price, if you have 90% of your portfolio in that stock, you're kind of ruined. You're done for. All of what you thought you had is now gone. That is something that diversification helps you avoid completely. If you're only holding 10% in Enron stock and Enron goes bankrupt, well, guess what? You could only lose 10%. The other 90% of your money is okay.
So as much as we want to, as much as I want to say, put all my money into Apple, all of it,
Yeah.
we should not.
It's tough. You can't, like we talked about, there are some companies that I think we could all list that we could never see any of us living without. You have your Apple, you have your phone, your iPad, you got this and that. It's hard to, you can't even fathom it being gone. And oftentimes, whenever people do end up with these things, they're in the accumulation stage of life. They're putting money into this. When it goes down, they put it in, so they see a great return whenever it goes up. And now, whenever you transition into retirement, and you got to start, you're going from accumulation to distribution. It's a little bit tougher to have those holdings. And whenever you're used to having them, that's when things can kind of get bad, because you say that, well, gosh, I've held this for so long, but not realizing that, hey, you're in a different part of your life, that if something does happen and this does go down and you need money, that can really have a negative compounding effect on your retirement.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another, just to beat on the 10% a little bit more, if that stock is also your employer, you need to think about your risk there, in that if something happened to that company, not only are you losing your job, but you're also losing all that stock you have. So if you have that really high concentration in one stock and your income dependent on it, maybe even worse, maybe you have a pension through that company too, or other benefits that are promised to you, you're really hurt. So diversifying away from that is very helpful. Sometimes that can be hard to unwind, especially if there's large tax implications. So thinking about that sooner rather than later is always a good bet for you.
Absolutely. And like I think you mentioned before, the tax implications might not be as bad as you think in retirement. There is a 0% capital gains rate. If you stop working, you're just on Social Security, a lot of people get close to. So there's definitely a benefit of reviewing that before retirement, and making sure that is part of your portfolio, part of your plan, to make sure that your portfolio is back on track. Yep. I mean, that 10% number Josh keeps saying, but really, I mean, when you start digging into things, just imagine if a company went bankrupt and you lost 10% of your money, that'd be pretty tough. So really, trying to get down below 5% with an individual holding, and, looking at things in that way is a little bit easier to stomach, let's just say.
Yeah, certainly agree. Most of our portfolios that we're managing for clients have less than a 10% holding. One that we partner with Morningstar, I've seen sometimes get pretty close to 10%, but that individual stock position is Berkshire Hathaway, which is inherently diversified within that company. It has multiple holdings in multiple sectors. So, 10% is kind of the easy rule. If you're violating that, why? And, really sitting down and being aware that you're taking a very large risk is something really important. If we think about diversification from like a progression standpoint, when you're starting out investing, maybe you start out and there's a local company that manufactures cars. So maybe you grew up in Detroit and you really liked Ford. So you bought Ford stock. And then it did well and you thought, I'm going to invest more money. So you put more money into Ford. And then you thought, you know what? I'm kind of worried Ford might not always be good. So I'm going to buy some GM stock too, right? Because that's a hometown company too. I'm going to diversify, right? So the next step is buying more stocks in the same sector. But if the auto industry goes bad, that's not really going to help you either, even if you own every auto manufacturer in the world. So the next step there would be, let's look across different sectors. Instead of just being in automotives or in manufacturing, maybe we invest in some technology as well. From there, okay, great. Now we have 2 sectors. Let's keep diversifying across sectors to spread that out further. We can start looking overseas, as we talked about then, looking outside of the U.S. for more diversified, globally opportunities. This will help you build out a portfolio. It's very easy to think of that first Ford stock buy in this scenario and think, well, it did really well, so I'm going to keep buying into it. And then if we think of a time like 2008, when the auto industry wasn't doing too well, you would be very upset. And even buying that GM wouldn't help you there. So building out that diversification over time is very important. For most of our listeners now, you should be pretty close to retirement. That's who we're typically speaking to, so you should be pretty far away from that point. If you're still putting all your money into that Ford stock, we really need to rip the Band-Aid off and get moving on this sooner than later.
All right. Thank gosh you're here, Josh.
Well, thanks, Wendy. Thanks.
That is it is definitely a process. There's it's definitely a process. There's not one way to kind of look at this, and I think that's a great example, and that people can start looking into. It's not just it's not just that you pick something. It's you're throwing a dart at a dartboard. Usually there is a method to the madness when we're looking at this.
Yeah.
So if you do need an overhaul, what do we need to do? We need to come to a guy like you.
Yeah, guy or gal. It doesn't have to be. Angela is more than capable of helping out in our office.
All right, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I, of all people,
you have to diversify there, Wendy. You said guy. Gotcha.
Gotcha. But you are a guy, but whatever.
Fair enough. No, but looking at it, having an advisor that can look over your portfolio for you. Many times people come into us well-intentioned with a 401k and they say, hey, look, I diversified. I got 10 funds, so I spread out my money between those 10 funds. Well, if we look and 3 of the funds own all the same stuff, we didn't really diversify there at all, right? So having a professional look through that portfolio, doing an x-ray to look at what you really own in the portfolio is kind of step 1. And just realizing any risk that you might be under. If you really like technology stocks and you know that you're overweight and you're willing to take that risk, that's one thing. But being caught off guard and losing most of your retirement funds without even knowing that you had this outsized risk is certainly not ideal. Starting off the new year, it's a great time to look at the diversification in your portfolio. Do an exercise with a financial professional to see what you really own. Take a second look at your tax diversification and evaluate if there's other financial tools that might be part of your plan. Until next time, remember to retire with intent so you can live your golden years with the happiness and excitement you deserve.